Hi, welcome to the third quarter wrap-up of 2022. I can't believe it's already December. I'm so close to achieving my reading goal, my unofficial reading goal for the year. So it's going to take a lot of reading to achieve that, but in the meantime, let's talk about the other books that I've read so far this year. So here are the books that I read between July and September. So I apologize if I sound a little bit sick, and I apologize for any noise, because today I am joined by a monster, but that's okay. So the first book that I read in July of 2022 is Milk and Honey by Rupi Kaur. This was my first ever poetry book, and the only reason I bought it was because it was a beautiful hardcover cloth-bound book, and I fell in love with the book, so I figured I might as well read it. And I was so surprised. I read it in one day, and I was so surprised by how much I loved it. So the quote from the book, I give the book 5 stars, and it is a poetry book. The quote that I chose is, "Depression is silent. You never hear it coming. And suddenly, it's the loudest voice in your head." The next book that I read this year is Home Before Dark by Riley Sager. This is a horror book, and I rated it 4.75 stars. I really enjoyed this book. It was good and creepy. And the quote that I chose from it is, "Every house has a story to tell." So the next book that I read is Homebody, another Rupi poetry book. I rated this one 4.5 stars. I didn't love it quite as much as Milk and Honey, but I still thoroughly enjoyed it. The quote that I chose from it, or the poem that I chose from it is, "I get so lost in where I want to go, I forget that the place I'm in is already quite magical." The next book that I read was a spicy book. The book is Wicked Ties by Sheila Black, and it is categorized as an erotic romance, but I didn't enjoy it quite as much as I was hoping for. I rated it only 1.75 stars. And the quote that I chose from it is, "Curiosity can be almost as powerful as desire." Next book, which I obviously had to read as fast as possible, is The Sun and Her Flowers, the third book that Rupi wrote, also a poetry book, and this one didn't quite live up to my expectations because they were just so high at that point. So I rated this book 3.75 stars, and the poem from it says, "Why is it that when the story ends, we begin to feel all of it?" The next book that I read was from the person who taught me during my master's degree and actually was the coordinator for my master's degree. His name is Dan Cleather, and the book is called What's the Worst That Could Happen? It is a memoir specifically about his experience with obsessive-compulsive disorder. The quote that I chose from this book is, "I wish I had known that everyone has weird and disturbing thoughts from time to time, and that they don't mean anything." The next book that I read was a Becca recommendation, and that is The Book Thief by Markus Zusak. This is a historical fiction book. It's super popular, and I rated it 4.25 stars. I really enjoyed it. I cried. It was awesome. The quote that I chose from the book is, "I have hated words and I have loved them, and I hope I have made them right." Next book that I read, I kind of went on a Riley Sager binge, is Survive the Night by Riley Sager. This is categorized as a mystery, and I rated it 3.5 stars. It definitely wasn't one of my favorite Riley Sager books, but still enjoyable, still a quick, distracting read that can take you out of real life. The quote that I chose from it is, "Meeting people is easy, keeping them around is the hard part." The next book that I read is If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. This is categorized as a mystery, and I rated it 2.75 stars. If you've read Donna Tartt's book, The Secret History, you don't need to read this one. They're so similar, and this one is a worse version of The Secret History. The quote that I chose from it is, "For someone who loved words as much as I did, it was amazing how often they failed me." The next book that I read was a nonfiction autobiography that I really enjoyed. It is Shoe Dog by Phil Knight, the founder of Nike. I really enjoyed reading his story, listening to all the wisdom that he had to bestow upon his readers. And the quote that I chose from it is, "The cowards never started, and the weak died along the way. That leaves us, ladies and gentlemen, us." The next book that I read, again, on my binge, was The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager. This book is also categorized as a fiction, and I rated it 3.25 stars. I remember it very well, and I respect how Riley Sager changed something in this book from all of his previous work. So I do appreciate that. The quote from it goes, "At night, you can't see your reflection on the water. Centuries ago, before people knew any better, it was common to believe that reflective surfaces could trap the souls of the dead." The next book that I read is The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. This was my second Kristen Hanna book. It is also historical fiction, and I also love this book. I rated it 4.75 stars, and the quote that I chose from it is, "If I have learned anything in this long life of mine, it is this. In love we find out who we want to be. In war we find out who we are." The next book that I read is Final Girls by Riley Sager. This is categorized as a horror, and I rated it 3.75 stars. The quote that I chose from this book is, "It's not your choice. It's already been decided for you. You can't change what's happened. The only thing you can control is how you deal with it." The next book that I read, I really enjoyed. It is Book Lovers by Emily Henry. This was my second Emily Henry book, and I enjoyed it. I rated it 4 stars. It was a different kind of romance, but I respected it and appreciated it. The quote that I chose from it is there anything better than iced coffee in a bookstore on a sunny day? I mean, aside from hot coffee and a bookstore on a rainy day." I mean, that's pretty true. Whether it's sunny or rainy, I think bookstores are the answer. The next book that I chose to read was The Maid by Nita Prose. And this book is categorized as a mystery, and it's actually nominated for a Goodreads Choice Award for 2022. However, I rated this book 1.75 stars. I thought I was lucky when I found it in the thrift store, but I realize now it was incredibly unlucky because then I made myself read it, and it was terrible. The quote that I chose is, "My truth is not the same as yours because we don't experience life in the same way." The next book that I read was a really good one. It is Under the Whispering Door by T.J. Klune. This is a fantasy book. It made me cry. It was very cute, very sweet. It evoked similar feelings to The House in the Cerulean Sea, so that was awesome. I rated it 4.25 stars, and the quote I chose from it is, "It's never enough, is it? Time. We always think we have so much of it, but when it really counts, we don't have enough at all." The next book that I read is The Last Time I Lied by Riley Sager. This is a mystery, and I rated it 4.75 stars. I really enjoyed it, and the quote that I chose from it is, "Sometimes the only way out is through." Oh, the next book that I chose this book based on somebody's recommendation because I was feeling a non-fictional memoir by a female, because that's usually a recipe for a good book for me. So I read Just Kids by Patti Smith. I didn't know who Patti Smith was, so maybe that was why I didn't enjoy the book. But I rated it 1.25 stars. Did not enjoy it at all. The quote that I chose from it was, "I learned from him that often contradiction is the clearest way to truth." The next book that I chose to read was one that I've seen the movie for, but didn't realize it was a book. And that book is Fight Club by Chuck Palahniuk. That's my best pronunciation. This is categorized as a thriller, and safe to say I didn't enjoy it. I rated it 2.5 stars, but I do have 2 quotes from it. The first quote is, "It's only after we've lost everything that we're free to do anything." And the next quote is, "This is your life, and it's ending one moment at a time." Alright, the last book that I read in July of 2022 is The Last House on Needless Street by Catriona Ward. Another book that I found in a thrift store. I found a used copy of it, so I was really excited. Thought I was lucky, and just like The Maid, it was actually really unlucky. It is categorized as a horror book, and it was horrible to read. I rated it 1.75 stars, and the quote that I chose from it is, "The trick to life is, if you don't like what is happening, go back to sleep until it stops." The next book that I read was in August, and it is Burnout by Amelia and Emily Nagoski. It is a non-fiction book that I really enjoyed. I rated it 4.75 stars, and the quote that I chose from it is, "All your body requires of you is that you turn toward it with kindness and compassion, with non-judgment and plain vanilla acceptance of all your contradictory emotions, beliefs, and longings. The next book that I read is The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. This was my first N.K. Jemisin book. It is a dystopian fiction book that I rated 3 stars. And the quote that I chose from it is, "For all those that have to fight for the respect that everyone else is given without question." The next book that I read is The Glass Hotel by Emily St. John Mandel. This was my second Emily St. John Mandel book, and it is categorized as a literary fiction. I hated it. I rated it 1.5 stars, and the quote that I chose from it is, "Memories are always bent retrospectively to fit individual narratives." And the next book that I read is also by Emily St. John Mandel, and it is Sea of Tranquility, her most recent book, which is categorized as a science fiction. And I enjoyed this one a little bit more. I rated it 2.5 stars. The quote that I chose from it is, "This is the strange lesson of living in a pandemic. Life can be tranquil in the face of death." The next book that I read, and my first Stephen King in a while, is Gerald's Game. This is categorized as a horror, and I enjoyed it not as much as I usually enjoy Stephen King, so it was only a 3.75 star read for me. The quote that I chose from it is, "Sometimes it takes heart to write about a thing, doesn't it? To let that thing out of the room, way in the back of your mind, and put it up there on the screen." The next book that I read was a fail for me. The book is Living with a Seal by Jesse Itzler. Again, I don't know who these people are. I didn't realize that this Jesse person was famous. You come to learn that in the book, though. This is a non-fictional book written by Jesse Itzler about his experience living with a Navy SEAL. I rated it 1.75 stars, and the quote that I chose from it is, "Most of my successes in life have come from learning how to be comfortable with being uncomfortable." The next book that I read is Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman. This is categorized as a contemporary fiction. However, it wasn't my favorite book. I rated it 2.75 stars. The quote that I chose from it is, "Sometimes you simply needed someone kind to sit with you while you dealt with things." The next book that I read, I actually read while I was traveling to Ireland, so I loved it. It was also about vacation, so I enjoyed reading it at that time. It is a romance by Emily Henry, my last Emily Henry book, and it is People We Meet on Vacation. I rated it 3.75 stars, and the quote that I chose from it is, "I still have a lot to figure out, but one thing I know is, wherever you are, that's where I belong. I'll never belong anywhere like I belong with you." The next book that I read is one that is very hyped up on the interwebs. The book is Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. It is categorized as a contemporary fiction, and it is all the rage right now. It wasn't my favorite. I rated it 2 stars, and the quote that I chose from it is, "At the end of the day, whether one returns to the past or travels to the future, the present doesn't change." The next book that I read is a non-fiction book by Emily Nagoski, and it is Come As You Are. I rated this book 3.25 stars. I didn't love it quite as much as her first book, or the book that I read first by her. But the quote that I chose from it is, "Emotions are tunnels. You have to go all the way through the darkness to get to the light at the end." The next book that I read is A History of My Brief Body by Billy Ray Belcourt. This is a non-fiction. It is a collection of short stories and essays that I rated 3.5 stars. The quote from it is, "To love someone is firstly to confess, I am prepared to be devastated by you." The next book that I read is Thank You for Listening by Julia Whalen, who is an audiobook narrator and an author. This is a romance, and I rated it 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. The quote from it is, "You're going to have to stop thinking you're nothing more than the damaged version of yourself." The next book that I read was a Stephen King book. It is Firestarter. This is categorized as a horror. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I rated it 4.25 stars, and the quote from it is, "Life is short and pain is long, and we were all put on this earth to help each other." The next book that I read was an awesome book. It is A Thousand Ships by Natalie Haynes, my first Natalie Haynes book. I loved it. It is categorized as a historical fiction, mythology book. It was lovely. I rated it 4.5 stars, and the quote from it is kind of long, but we're gonna go with it. It says, "Sing, Muse," he said, and I have sung. I have sung of armies, and I have sung of men. I have sung of gods and monsters, and I have sung of stories and lies. I have sung of death and of life, of joy and pain. I have sung of life after death, and I have sung of the women in the shadows. I have sung of the forgotten, the ignored, the untold. The next book, the first book that I read in September, is the entire Harry Potter series. But we'll go through them one at a time. So the first book that I read was Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. All the Harry Potter books are categorized as fantasy books, and I rated all of them 5 stars. So from Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, the quote that I chose is, "It does not do to dwell on dreams and forget to live." From Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, I chose, "It's our choices, Harry, that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities." From Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, I chose, "Happiness can be found, even in the darkest of times, if only one remembers to turn on the light." From Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, I chose, "If you want to know what a man's like, take a good look at how he treats his inferiors, not his equals." I apologize for the snoring. From Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, I chose, "Indifference and neglect often do much more damage than outright dislike." From Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, I chose, "It is the unknown we fear. It is the unknown we fear when we look upon death and darkness, nothing more." And finally, from Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, I chose, "Do not pity the dead, Harry. Pity the living, and above all, those who live without love." During my reading of the Harry Potter books, I also read The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. This book is categorized as a horror, and I did not enjoy it. I rated it 2.5 stars, and the quote that I chose from it is, "It's soft at the end, not just the pain, but the world." I also read Britt Marie Was Here by Frederick Bachman. I rated this book 4 stars, and it is categorized as a contemporary fiction. The quote that I chose from this book is, "One morning you wake up with more life behind you than in front of you, not being able to understand how it's happened." The next book that I read is one of my favorite books that I read in 2022. I still think about it often, and the book is Pandora's Jar by Natalie Haynes. This is a non-fiction book that examines Greek myth through a feminist lens. And I rated this book 4.5 stars at the time, but in hindsight, I think it's a 5-star book. The quote that I chose from it is, "But these myths are full of violence, and we should at least ask why it is the violence against women that is removed in order to make our heroes uncomplicated adventurers." The next book that I read is Pretty Girls by Karen Slaughter, a book that had been on my TBR list for such a long time. It is categorized as a mystery, and I rated it 4.25 stars. The quote that I chose from it is, "Children always have different parents, even in the same family." The next book that I read is a romance. It is Take a Hint, Danny Brown by Talia Hibbert. I rated this book 3.5 stars. The quote that I chose from it is, "The world wasn't split into unhappy endings and happily ever afters. There were blessings everywhere and 1,000 shades of joy all around him." The book that I read after that was also by Talia Hibbert, and it is the last book in the trilogy, the Brown Sisters trilogy, also a romance, and that book is Actor Age Eve Brown. The quote that I chose from it is, "Sometimes being convenient instead of real was exhausting." The next book that I read was Carmilla by J. Sheridan LaFano. This book is categorized as horror, and I rated it 3.25 stars. The quote that I chose from it is, "But dreams come through stone walls, light up dark rooms or darken light ones, and their persons make their exits and their entrances as they please, and laugh at locksmiths." The next book that I read is The Dead Zone by Stephen King. This is the first in the Castle Rock series, I believe. It is categorized as a horror, and I rated it 3.25 stars. The quote that I chose from it is, "Some things were better lost than found." The next book that I read is an Agatha Christie book that I really, really enjoyed. The book is And Then There Were None, and it is categorized as a mystery. I think most of Agatha Christie's books are mysteries. But I really enjoyed this one. I rated it 4 stars, and the quote is, "In the midst of life, we are in death." The next book that I finished was The It Girl by Ruth Ware. This is categorized as a mystery. I rated this book 3 stars. It definitely wasn't my favorite Ruth Ware book, but I did enjoy it, especially at the end. And the quote that I chose from it is, "You're never alone in a room filled with 1,000 books." The next book that I read is The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. This is a book categorized as a contemporary fiction, and I really enjoyed it. I rated it 4.25 stars. The quote that I chose from it is, "What's the point of having a voice if you're going to be silent in those moments you shouldn't be?" The second last book in the third quarter of 2022 is The Chain by Adrian McKinty. This is categorized as a mystery, and I rated it 4.75 stars. As I've talked about in the past, this book gave me so much anxiety, caused me so much stress. I had to pause it multiple times because it was too intense for me to keep reading. I still think about it, and I loved the book. The quote I chose is, "A true predator sometimes kills even when it isn't hungry." And the final book that I read in the third quarter of 2022 is The Curious Case of Benjamin Button by F. Scott Fitzgerald. This book is categorized as a classic, and I rated it 2.5 stars. It wasn't my favorite. The quote that I chose from this book is, "You are meant to lose the people you love. How else would you know how important they are to you?" Alright, those are the books that I read in the third quarter of 2022. It was definitely my biggest quarter. I have been in a little bit of a reading slump this month, or last month. So those are the books that I got through in the third quarter. I'm really, really happy with all of those books and the amount of books that I got through. It's going to be a mad dash and reading marathon to finish all of the books that I hope to finish this year. So that wrap-up will come sometime in January, hopefully. But that's all from now. Bye!